wabarakatuh. Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to the Open Dialogue. Today we will be discussing Is Prevention Better Than Cure? And the relevance of traditional medicine such as herbal remedies. To discuss this topic with us, we have Brother Alex Carberry, who is a practicing herbalist and author of the Know Yourself series of books on traditional Greek and Sufic biotypes. He's also known as Hakim Abu Bakr. We are grateful that you could join us today, Brother Alex.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Also joining us for today's discussion is Hujjatul Islam wal Muslimin, Syed Mohammad Razavi, who is the head of the Religious Advisory Board at the Shia Islamic Education Society in London. And he has 40 years of experience in dealing with clients from all over the world and solving their domestic issues. Salamu alaikum, Syed, and thank you for your time.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you for hosting.
Now, before we enter the discussion, Brother Alex, I would like you to introduce your work to the audience and also the book that you have authored and where they can find it and what kind of work and research you are involved in.
Subhanallah. I'm a practicing herbalist. I have always had an interest in health and in a sense a medicine which is interested in finding cures and solutions rather than having a dogma. And so that took me to looking into medicinal traditions around the world. And being Muslim, I became particularly interested in the medicine amongst Muslims and making that relevant to my time. One of the things that I do is I run a clinic, but I also publish books on something they call Firasa, which was the science by which you could look at a man or a woman and know things about their character and their pattern, but which was also used to treat people because different types have different physiological weaknesses and different psychological orientations. So one of the things I've been doing is writing books to actually explain how that works, a way that makes it easy for a modern audience to deal with some self-development issues. So that's my main work. I also the books I publish are called Know Yourself. They're generally available on Amazon, and they've been around. They've been selling for the last 10 years, and they've become a bit of a cult classic, actually. So I'm on the third now, which is about the fiery type. Type's waiting for like 4 years until I'd finished it. So alhamdulillah. So that's what I do. I also do some research into ways of doing research for things like herbal medicine, using things like machine learning, etc. Yeah, so that's what I do. Alhamdulillah.
What brought you to this work, Brother Alex? What made you start looking
Allah
into
twisted
herbal
my arm. It was as a child, I was born in England, but I grew up in Guyana, where my and I was about 3 years old, and I was one of those children that was started. My parents sent me to school early. I started like nursery at 2 because they were fed up of having me at home because I had a lot of questions. And so my grandmother was saddled with me, and the second day she took me to this old woman who was also a herbalist, and I would keep her company, and we would chat. We would chat, pick herbs, and talk about what you use them for. We make teas, and we just sit down, and she'd tell me stories, which introduced me to our culture. So herbal medicine has been with me since then. I never thought that I would, but when I was about 40, I mean, people would always, I would sometimes be really confused as to how they knew that I knew. But when I was about 40, people just kept coming. And so I had to then eventually, then, that's my story in a nutshell.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah. Syed, what is it about Islam? Because brother Alex is a convert to Islam and a revert, and mashallah, that got him interested into looking into the traditional ways of healing as well. But what is it about Islam and its holistic nature that attracts many individuals towards the faith?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I would like to start with the verse of Holy Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Shu'ara, verse number 80 says, وَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينِ. And these are the words of Prophet Ibrahim referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying that when I become ill, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me the cure.
Hmm.
And according to Islamic teachings, the knowledge is divided into two knowledge: ilmul abdan wa ilmul adyan, knowledge of body and knowledge of religion. So both of these two knowledges are considered as very or extremely valuable knowledges and encouraged. People are encouraged to learn both of them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself likes to be called Tabib and Shafi. Tabib means doctor or medical doctor or the person who cures. And Shafi also means the person who gives shafa, gives cure. So I would say that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes to be called Tabib and likes to be called Shafi, who is better than him to seek help in the times of illness and problems that we face in our life? And of course, if we refer to Islamic teachings, the teachings of Prophet Muhammad and his companions and global family members, we find that they used to encourage people to prevention rather than medication. Medication is important, but the best way to cure yourself is by preventing yourself. There is a hadith or Arabic saying as well that a person would not die by not eating. And there is a hadith which says that the stomach is the center of all illnesses. When you become ill, the best cure is abstention. Abstain yourself from what you have been eating and then adopt prevention. Then inshallah you will get cured. There is another narration that don't treat yourself up to 3 days. Let the body fight itself. And normally, if the illness is not serious, within 3 days the body manages to fight and starts recovering. If the illness lasts longer than 3 days, then we should start thinking about medication. And the best medication is abstention, and then following the advice of the experts who could advise you in with medicine. And the best medicine is not chemical medicine. Best medicine is herbal medicine, or the medicine that exists in the nature created by God Himself. God has created us, and He has provided the source of cure in what exists around us in this planet Earth that we are living in. Some of the problem with the general medicine is that they use and treat all human beings equally and give one medicine to everyone. But a true Hakim, a true Tabib, and true uh, doctor is the one who looks at every individual as a separate case, looks at the circumstances, looks at the environment they are being brought up, and then gives the prescription. And then that prescription helps. I'm sure our guest is very knowledgeable in this field, and he will be able to more guide us in this path.
Thank you for that, Syed. I think to understand ilm al-abdan and to understand prevention, first of all, we need to understand what is health in its essence, Mr. Alex. If you could explain that to us, because health is something very undervalued until our bodies become sick and ill. So what would you define as health? What is health in its essence?
Um, Health is balance. Health is appropriateness.
Mhm,
Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you seek balance. Allah says, "Kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum." He says, eat or enjoy the things that we provided you with. وَلَا تَطْغَوْا فِيهِ, and don't go to excess in them. فَيُحِلُّ عَلَيْكُمْ غَضْبِي, because if you do that, you will unleash on yourself Allah's anger. فَمَنْ يَحْلِلْ عَلَيْهِ غَضْبِي فَقَدْ هَوَى, and the one who unleashes that, he is destroyed.
mhm,
And so what you realize is that there is in going to excess in things. And in this case, I understand that as that the ghadab, right? That is his wrath. And so in life, in our relationships, in our eating and so on, and in our rest, etc., and our activity, you have to be able to seek balance. And
mhm,
also the tendency to be imbalanced is this of internal psychological imbalance. And the
mhm,
word psyche in Greek, it means soul.
mhm,
So imbalance is always as an indication of a ruhani issue. And so that health is not only this capacity to seek balance, but to find internal balance. Yeah. So the one like excessively attached to ibadah, and they will neglect their worldly affairs.
mhm,
And so if they do that, then first of all, there is an imbalance. So there is going to be stress from from the worldly matters that they are not dealing with. Okay,
mhm,
and often that will drive them to become even more imbalanced. And at some
mhm,
point, it will manifest in psychological illness. So when the symptom appears long after the problem began.
mhm,
And in this way, the symptoms are like the messengers of Allah, because they're Bashiran and Nadhiran. If you do something about them, they are Bashiran. If you don't, then they're Nadhiran. They're one.
mhm. Sure. Sayyid Mohammed, what's your thought about that lifestyle and relationships affect our health? And temperament also, the effect of temperament on our health. Well, is there an acknowledgement in the traditions of Ahlebait on the link between temperament and our health of the body and mind?
Of course, I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us as a being, as a metaphysical and physical being. And we need to take care of both sides. We have to look after the physical side of our health and body, because this is amana and trust of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hands, and He has given us this body to look after and take care of. Of course, we have not been created to live with this body eternally. Our eternal direction or eternal life is in metaphysical dimension, but it
Mhm,
does not mean that we neglect and ignore the physical dimension of our health. And the physical dimension of health depends on what type of life we live. If we live a stressful life, if we live an abusive life, if we live, when I say abusive life, uh, if I am doing or eating something which is forbidden for me and not good for me, I'm abusing myself. So that
mhm,
causes two kinds of harm. It harms my physical side, physical dimension, and it also harms my metaphysical dimension uh, by disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't eat or drink certain food. So if
mhm,
I do that, I am harming, I'm being abusive to myself and
yes.
harming my metaphysical dimension and physical dimension both. So I'm responsible for that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question me on the day of judgment for not looking after. And also, we believe that it's not just halal and haram. Halal and haram goes up to the point of how you are making or earning your halal living. If
Mhm,
my lifestyle, if my earning is by oppressing others and by forcing others to pay me, by taking riba and doing all these things that brings haram money into my lifestyle, and I go and buy food from that haram or not halal earning and feed myself and feed my children and family members, it would
mhm,
have side effects. So uh, physical health and metaphysical health goes side by side, and we cannot neglect one in the favor of other, or neglect other in the favor of other. We have to take care of both sides,
sure.
otherwise we will not be. As brother was mentioning, the main thing is balance. If we don't create the balance, we are not living a healthy life. Healthy life
Mhm,
means we keep the balance. And meaning of a Muslim is that he keeps the balance. He doesn't trespass, or that does not become an extremist, or he does not become extremist in both directions.
mhm.
So,
That brings me nicely to the next question to Brother Alex. How can you expand a little bit more on this, what the Syed said and what you previously also mentioned? How exactly does the body and mind work together, and what is the range of ailments and that can be treated through herbal medicine, and how we can prevent illnesses? So it's three questions, but if we can start with the question with how does the mind and body work together so that we can prevent becoming ill?
well, when Allah blew that ruh into man, for all intents and purposes, while you are in this world, it's one thing. You know, you don't experience yourself in China and your body is in Russia, or it's all here in one place.
Mhm,
As your when your the state of your mind changed, the state of your body changed also. Okay, they are not separate. When we experience them as separate, that's also an indication of imbalance. Okay, and it's like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he walked, it was a beautiful thing. He would, he slightly leaned forward. His arms would swing quite naturally. He was in his body. He was also aware of who was behind him. Yeah. They say his vision was almost, it was all round. It was 360. So this whole thing of being in your body and present in your body is part of a healthy mind, and the experience of separation, and there's a lot, the experience of being separated like that is an indication of illness, and also in a root spiritual illness. So you'll find that historically, it was like there was this. I was looking at an advert, not advert, a job description of the imam of a mosque, and he had to know, he had to be physically fit. He had to have to know his sword arts. He had to speak Arabic, Persian. He had to know Arabic, Persian, Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. It was, so there was always this sense of wholeness in human beings, and the Muslims would call it was part of maru'a. It was like manhood, and that's this capacity for being integrated. It was always part of it. So meditation is part of the deen, right? It's part of so mind and body are one thing, and that is why at the point that the angel of death comes to remove the ruh, it is so painful, because Allah has welded them together in this dunya. Yeah.
Sure.
You are regenerated on the Yawm al-Ba'ath, then you are regenerated from the seed of what is left of this body.
Yes.
Am I
Of
correct,
course.
Maulana Razavi?
Yes, yes. We are
Rasulullah was also
combination of
known as.
we are
Go ahead.
combination of metaphysical and physical being, and they cannot be
Yeah,
separated. We are here together. We
yeah.
cannot be
Rasulullah was
separated.
also known as Tabibun Dawarun bi-tibbihi, right? So he used to go around and he was a healer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
So what are the range of ailments then that are treated via herbal medicine, Brother Alex?
You see, the thing about it is that really there is medicine, okay? Because if the illness is relational, in relationships, then you have to tell them herbal medicine isn't going to help that. It's going to strengthen the body, but the person has to sort out their relationship, all right? If the illness is in the way that the person sees themselves, then it has to be healed by showing them how to look at themselves and interrogate that, and to come out to a vision of themselves which has shukr hamd in it. Okay, so medicines is only one tiny part of cure. Okay, and so what we do with the medicines and what we do with like lifestyle matters or psychological matters is that we help a human being to recover their balance. So and I give you an example. When people have okay, for psychological illnesses, the body has fight, flight, fright, freeze. Yeah, these are the autonomic responses that the body has, and then the when that happens, the mind then freezes the body in a constant repetition of a response. So with
mm,
herbs, like in freeze, one of the things we do is we open circulation. We use herbs which open circulation to the surface, etc. Right?
mm,
So we use herbs which go against the freeze response. So in
right.
that way, there is nothing that you cannot address because the point is balance.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Thank you.
Because Allah
Yes.
says, Allah says, He uses this word. He says, "Taghaw," yeah,
Mm,
that you have gone beyond a limit. So the medicine is within the parameters of natural of balanced human limits.
right. Yes, makes sense. So then, does traditional medicine work alongside modern medicine, or are they in conflict with each other? Do they complement each other?
Well, in my experience, doctors tend to be quite antagonistic to what I do, but they belong to Allah, so I don't see what the conflict is. The point is the patient. The
Hmm,
patient needs to be better. The patient doesn't really care whether it's a herb or what they want to get better. So the point
true.
is, um, yes, I mean, I myself have studied modern physiology and anatomy and how people get ill. I use their text because they're very
Hmm,
informative. But
hmm,
what I found amazing is that I would sit with doctors and they're showing me what they do, but they never ask me what I do. And I've seen cases in which I think that what they're doing is actually quite barbarous, and we have better
hmm,
solutions. So I think, especially as Muslims, our point is
hmm.
to serve people. So we should be working together.
Interestingly, you say this because I was reading online, and the statistics actually show that 40% of drugs in the Western world are derived from plants used by people for centuries. So that's 40% of the pharmaceutical industry's drugs are actually derived from plants that have been used for a long time. And that includes 20 best-selling prescription drugs in the USA. So clearly, plant-based medicine has its place, and uh, it's there's of course needs to be more research, but it has been used by people, and till today, 80% of the world's population use uh, plant-based medication and
Yeah,
traditional medication.
yeah,
Sayed,
yeah.
what
And
is sorry, go ahead.
no, no. All I was going to say is that, and in Tib, there is a branch of alchemy which would tend to use minerals, and some of them quite poisonous, to make medicine,
Hmm,
which is very much of what is done with modern medicine. Yeah.
right,
So that's all. I was just making that point. Mhm.
sure. Sayed, have the Ahl al-Bayt placed emphasis on plants and their healing powers and the role of plants in a human's health?
Yes, I mean, if we look at the narrations and practices narrated about them in dealing with illnesses and problems, they used to give advice. First of all, they used to advise to abstain. Like somebody came and he was complaining about some kind of illness, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him not to eat dates for few days, and
Hmm,
then after a few days he was advised to start eating dates, but with some restriction. So
hmm,
obviously, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam must have noticed that uh, date, although recommended, but in that case was harming due to some conditions that existed in that person. So this teaches us that, of course, we either have to be knowledgeable ourselves, and if we are not knowledgeable, and we can't be knowledgeable in everything. So this is where
Yes.
we need to refer to experts, and nothing wrong to go to Tabib or Hakim or expert or professional and seek his or her advice in such cases. And of course, a good tabib or good hakim uh, would always believe that shifa, final cure, is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands. I remember in Middle East and other Muslim countries that I lived, uh, when we used to go to these doctors and tabib, even the medical doctors, modern medical doctors of Muslim countries, the prescription that at the top of the prescription, they usually, especially the practicing Muslim tabibs and doctors, liked to write huwa shafi, the real cure is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is good to, at the same time, a good tabib would also teach a good lesson to the person who's ill, that look, I am just a tool. The shifa, real shifa, will be given to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And recent research and study has also proved that people who are connected to God and seek His help in curing, beside taking the precautions and going to the experts in healing themselves, are healed much quicker than those who do not have any belief at all. So it does work side by side and together, and it is a responsibility of a tabib. And before doctors and tabib, the reason why that doctor puts huwa shafi at the top of his prescription is because of his upbringing at home. His mother and father from childhood taught him to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his cure. And he became an expert and doctor, and he believes in that. And the person who goes to that tabib also, if he is a believer or she is a believer, then he would also believe and understand the meaning of Huwa Shafi as well, and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beside taking the medication and following the advice of the experts in prevention.
Sure. Thank you. Brother Alex, I'm quite intrigued. I was reading the leaflet about your work and your workshops, and I came across this word biotypes. If you could explain to us what is the concept of biotypes, and also there was something written about using your own natural genius. If you can explain these concepts to us, that sounded quite interesting in the leaflet of your work.
Okay, well, there's something we call mizaj, is that
Right.
every person has a specific balance. And in our understanding, there are four types. That thinks a lot. So they think before they speak, and they consider and so on, and they like to work out. And this type tends to be anxious about um, things being lacking in the future, so they tend to save and organize things. Okay, and we call this the melancholic. This type also has weak digestion, so a lot of times this type will become ill because of digestive issues. Okay, and then it's almost after that, the next one to that is the one we call the phlegmatic. And the phlegmatic is a type that tends to be faced, sits back, is an excellent observer, and doesn't like to do anything that they don't have. If they have to do something, they think, do I really have to do this? Okay, so people will often think that they're lazy, but they're incredibly observant, and acutely intelligent. Okay, and then there's another type which is they call it damawi, or sanguine. And this type, they loved it in the literature. They love this type, and they tend to be quite happy and they change their minds a lot, and they love to tell stories and they're quite colorful. They have very strong digestion. Um, and this type tends to suffer diseases of excess. They overdo it.
Mhm.
And type which is their nature is fire, very decisive. They like to drive things ahead. They think they're worried. They wanted to get done quickly. And if you've got a
Mm.
person like that, there they if they want to get something done, they will badger you until it's done. Yeah.
Okay.
And this type is called choleric. And the problem, this type tends to, when they're ill, it tends to involve nervous and cardiovascular conditions. And
Right.
what's really interesting about these types is that there are certain systems in them which are very strong, and so they tend to overuse them. Okay, and you can predict their weakness, and because of the psychological disposition of the type, um, they are disposed to get into certain types of problems. So we call them biotypes,
Mm.
because it also the shape of the face, the makeup of the body, and you hear it in their footsteps. Yeah.
So
And
treating
if you
these
go on the pulse, you
biotypes,
feel
then,
it.
yes, go ahead.
Mhm. No, no, I'm just saying, if you when you take the pulse, you can tell. Yeah.
That it's quite high.
Well, because each of them are different. The pulse of the phlegmatic is quite slow.
Mm.
It's wrong, and if it's
The
not, it tends to be weaker. Yeah. So there are
the old
patterns with each one of them. So a lot. Hmm.
the old tabibs and hakim, they the best way they could recognize their patient was by just touching the pulse. They
Yeah.
would immediately decide what was going wrong with the
Yeah.
person. This reminds me of an Indian very expert tabib. He was so expert that he could tell the illness of the patient by just putting a string around his wrist and giving. So one day somebody wanted to test him, and they put a goat behind the curtain and put the string on the hand of the goat and gave it to him. So he held the string for a while, and after a while he said, "Well, the best thing is to give him some grass." How did you recognize? He said, "Well, the pulse that you gave me, the pulse that I was feeling in my hand was giving me the indication that this is not a human being's pulse." So
Yes.
old
Alhamdulillah.
tabibs and hakims were quite expert. By just touching and feeling the pulse of the patient, they would realize what was the problem, which unfortunately does not exist in modern doctors.
Yeah, it doesn't. But that knowledge still exists. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, the
And
knowledge
Alhamdulillah.
of the
brother,
pulse still exists.
like brother Alex, are practicing that knowledge, mashallah, and learning it and passing it on to us.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that it's about, here's your time. You have to treat for your time. Our time
Mm.
is that people don't no longer understand how to live in harmony. Part of the thing, right? We are quite split. And
Mm.
so I remember I would take pulses and then tell people, but I found that it didn't help people to understand their condition. So then
Right.
I had to change the way I did, I let them. So now I let people talk, and by the time they finished talking, they figured out what's wrong. Yeah, and this is
What do
important
you
in our.
believe about homeopathic? What do you believe about homeopathic medicine?
It has its place. It is Ibn Sina, in Ibn Sina's work. It's the principle is discussed. Yeah, the principle of similars. Um, I think people's problem is that they can't understand how our medicine would just be energetic in an age that is quite focused on material. Yeah. But I think my experience of homeopathy has been similar to my experience of using the Quran and water, because there's also a knowledge of using the Quran, so which you give people ayahs to recite. You just recite this or that or do that, and it will cure physical illnesses. So I think it's an energetic medicine, and it uses it's an energetic medicine. Yeah.
Which is what the
Or
Syed said
what?
at the start of the program. We're using God's name and Allah is the healer and the Shafi. Sorry, Syed, you were saying something.
In Islamic medicine, we also find that old tabibs and hakims used to advise taking blood out, or maybe using leeches to suck the blood
Hmm.
out, or maybe acupuncture in some kind of form was accepted and used. Do you think that is beneficial, or have you
Of course.
practiced?
Of course, I mean there are major hadith on removing blood, and yes, and even modern medicine has begun to engage with that. Yeah. So yes, of course, I myself, okay, there's some aspects of tibbu which I've stopped practicing. One of them was purging humors, because we would, in the four humor theory, then you would purge a humor. And when you purge the humor, it will produce a fever and then some spitting or diarrhea or whatever. And what I found was that when I was treating people like that, they'd go to the doctor and they'd give them something to stop it. And that can be fatal. So I stopped doing that. Yeah, so there's the bloodletting. I don't practice in my own clinic because I tend not to see people physically anymore. It's very rare that I see people physically.
Hmm.
Uh, but it is something
Can you also tell us,
I would recommend.
sure.
Sorry.
Can you also tell us, Mr. Alex, about your research in the utilization of artificial intelligence and the community centered healing? What is that concept?
Well, there's this whole thing of devices like this, which I call the Internet of Things, which really collects a lot of biodata. And one of the issues that we have is that they say that these traditional systems don't have scientific evidence, right? And for me, it is that one of the things we must achieve as Muslims, we really have to be at the forefront of things. We have to produce solutions that solve problems now. And so one of the things I'm working on is getting and practitioners to engage with research methods in their work. So using things like this to gather data and analyze data and produce a body of evidence that shows how these interventions change certain, that they improve lives, and they heal. So it's about giving a framework for that, but also making sure that, because the attitude of people is that they go to someone to look after them. But you'll find that certain communities have certain types of illnesses. And I think it's very important that we get communities to take responsibility for the health of their communities. And so
Right.
using that, I'm looking at ways of giving communities tools to address health issues so that there's knowledge which lives amongst them. So that's what I'm doing. And artificial intelligence and statistical methods are a good tool to do that with. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm afraid we are reaching the end of the program. So before we wrap up, Syed, if you would like to give a concluding remark, please.
Well, as I mentioned before, we need to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His power of cure, and we should follow the orders. He is the true cure. I mean, he whatever He has commanded us to do is not without a wisdom. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He tells us to eat something and abstain from something, there must be a reason. He is our creator, and we should show our obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala physically and in both dimension, metaphysical dimension, physical dimension. Then we can call ourselves Muslims. Otherwise, we are not surrendered to the will of God.
Thank you. And Brother Alex, what would your concluding remark be? And obviously, if we've missed anything in the program that we haven't discussed or touched upon, please do advise us of that. And also your concluding remark.
Well, this we are traveling through life, and Allah has given us. Allah knows us. Allah knows us from the bottom up, from the inside out. And so when He gives us commands, it is because He knows us, and
Yeah.
we go against our own peril. And in an age which is profoundly imbalanced, we have this opportunity to bring balance, and that balance is called ubudiyah. It is to submit to Allah, is to submit to the order of the way things really are. And then when you do that, you become quite appropriate. And when you become appropriate, you bring health. And so, as a nation, we have an opportunity to be the bringers of health to our age. That's just an opportunity. We have to take it. And physically, we'll experience the benefits. Socially, we'll experience the benefits. And everyone around us will benefit by that, because for the Muslim, he is responsible for his neighbors up to 40 doors. If we took that on, and our communities would be vastly different.
Well, it's
you
a
can't
thoroughly
separate social.
interesting. Yes.
Alhamdulillah.
Carry on.
No, I'm finished. I'm done. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's been a thoroughly interesting topic to discuss, and a thoroughly interesting discussion. And your work obviously is very intriguing and interesting. Obviously, we would like to remind the viewers that for thorough advice, they need to all contact their GP. Thank you very much for the guests.